each of the agenda items has a hyperlink, or at the very least, a way of finding information. And what I mean by this is each agenda item will have certain reports attached to it, right? So like a lot of times city staff will write a staff report that describes what the purpose of the agenda item is, the research that's gone into it in the past, other city policies that may relate to the agenda item. City staff will have like a recommended action. So the city staff will recommend, we recommend that city council votes yes to approve this ordinance, or city council says, upon analysis, we've decided that city staff needs an extra 4 months to work on this, or whatever that recommendation may be. So you can use all of this information to develop your specific goal for a meeting. So a very general example, let's say that there's an agenda item on there for a climate action plan. And I'm reading the attachments, they've attached the draft climate action plan. I'm reading through the draft language and oh, what's this? Carbon neutrality by 2050? That seems kind of late, especially since the state of California has a goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. So that seems like a weak goal. Maybe that's an area where we could pressure the city and say, hey, why don't you accelerate your carbon neutrality goal to at the very least align with state targets and ideally exceed that? And again, that's an argument we can only make because we read the agenda, we read the draft plan that was being considered, and we found weaknesses in it. This is what I do all the time as an advocate. Since I cover a lot of different cities, I cover about 42 jurisdictions, I'm like a vulture. I'm just kind of like hovering around, reading people's plans and policies, and then I find a weakness and I dive in on that and I say, well, change this language, amend this, and there are different styles as an advocate. That's sort of like the vulture style, is going in, reading the plans, finding weaknesses, improving stuff. And you can only really do this if you're reading the agendas and clicking on the items. So again, with knowledge of the agenda, you can develop a specific goal. And since you're developing that goal around what is being discussed in the agenda, the city has the power to take action on it at that meeting. And let's say I wasn't to read the agenda, and instead, during the climate action plan item, I were to say, oh, why don't you pass this other ordinance that does this other thing that relates to climate, but it's separate from the climate action plan? That is where I start to become ineffective as an advocate, because I'm asking the city to take action on something that they haven't explicitly put into the agenda. So they're powerless to do action on that. The cities actually cannot take action on items that are not in the agenda. So again, look at the agenda, develop your specific goal, read all the documents, and yeah, a lot of times the right thing to do just kind of pops up when you read something and you're like, that's weak, what the heck? How are they doing that? So yeah, once you develop your specific goal, it's time to make your voice heard. So this is all, I would say, like extra credit. At the end of the day, I would love for folks just to hop into their city council meeting and give a 2-minute public comment. But if you have a specific goal, you've read the agenda, you're inspired to put in the extra work, well, here are some things you can do to help make your advocacy goal more likely to succeed. Number one, educate your peers and community. The more people you have at your back in the city council meeting, the more people you have pressuring these elected officials, the more people in your community that are informed about the kind of policies that are being passed, you're just creating an environment where success is more likely. And ultimately, we're looking to influence elected officials and staff. So that looks like, calling up staff people and elected officials, or in my case, I usually send them an email inviting them to hop on a phone call with me. Establishing rapport, sending them information, finding out what their needs are. A lot of times elected officials and staff people, they all have their own political calculations that they're making. And if you can talk to people involved and figure out what they're worried about, what they're excited about, a lot of times that just opens up opportunities as an advocate to be like, oh, well, this person wants this, which aligns with what this person wants. So if we recommend this, we could actually satisfy staff and the elected officials and get it passed. And yeah, so talk to people involved, send letters, give public comments, and then if, let's say a city council stuck their neck out for you, they passed that climate policy you've been asking them to pass, sending a follow-up thank you letter can actually be really nice. I've heard from elected officials that just getting a thank you can make them far more likely to back you up in the future because they know, oh, if I stand behind these community members, they recognize what I've done and they're going to support me as well.
I also recommend following up. I'll keep jumping in here because we have a little bit more of an uphill struggle here in Contra Costa County typically than other counties. What I do is I recommend a follow-up letter just because it helps to reinforce and get heard because otherwise you just kind of like, okay, done. And it doesn't have to be fancy. If you already wrote down your talking points, you could just send we have all of the elected officials in a roster. I can put that link in the chat. You can just send them a quick note like, hey, like I said tonight at your meeting, please put climate action planning on an agenda. So thank yous, yes. And I do think some record, I just push for that personally. Then they can't ignore us.
Yep.
And you can say, hey, I got an email right here. It's in the public record. How many times do I have to ask for this?
Yeah. And you can like reference it, right? I've seen people come in like, I sent you a letter last week. It has these provisions in there. I hope you adopt them. And sometimes they'll reference their letter in the agenda. So they'll be like, yeah, I sent a letter last week. You'll find it on PDF page 24 of the agenda packet. If you could just go to that right now and look at the language modifications I'm suggesting, please implement those. And yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about giving a public comment. This is probably the most powerful thing you could do if you only have one thing to do. If you don't have a whole lot of time, just finding out from your friends when the meeting is, hopping in, giving that public comment and support, and then just leaving is probably, in terms of like short amount of time, highest impact action. Public comments, far and away, one of the best things you can do. So each individual agenda item for a city has a flow, and that flow usually goes like this. City staff will introduce the item, give a PowerPoint presentation describing what's happening. Then the elected officials will have a brief opportunity to ask clarifying questions. They're not supposed to give their opinions. They're supposed to only ask clarifying questions. Then after that is public comment, and that's our time to speak. And then after our public comment, elected officials deliberate. That's when they give their opinions. They haggle out, okay, what are we actually doing? And then after that, they vote. And that concludes the agenda item. And then we move on to the next item. So giving a public comment, what does that actually look like? Well, if you're joining for Zoom, so after the presentation given by staff and after the clarifying questions given by the elected officials, usually it's the city clerk will say, all right, we are now opening up the window for public comment, and they will give specific instructions, which usually sounds like, if you are on Zoom, please click the raise hand button and we will call on you. And there are some cities that allow you to have your camera on. Most of them are smart and they have been Zoom bombed, and which is basically just people coming in to troll them on Zoom and say and do nasty things. So cities will keep their webcams off, and they'll keep you muted by default. So when you raise your hand to give your public comment and it is your turn, you'll see a little pop-up come up on your window and it will say, the host would like you to unmute yourself. And you just unmute yourself. The city clerk will call on you by name. A lot of times you'll see a timer pop up on the screen and you just talk. And you have about 2 minutes usually or less. Some cities have a 3-minute public comment window, and then some cities will shrink the amount of time you have to speak if there's a lot of speakers or they don't have a lot of time in the agenda. So I've had times where I only have 30 seconds to speak and I'm like, well, I'll just take that public comment that I've written and cut out like the most important paragraph and I'll just say that. I usually plan for 2 minutes or less, and then I plan on having one of my paragraphs be like the key paragraph that contains all of my asks to the city, and I will retreat back to that paragraph if I don't have a lot of time. Gosh, I've probably given like, I don't know, I've given a bunch of public comments. I've lost track and I still get nervous every time. So that's okay, it's normal. And I actually think being nervous is kind of an advantage. If you're an elected official and you're up there and you see someone who's just struggling, like you hear their voice cracking, or if it's someone who's joined in person and they're clearly uncomfortable up there, that demonstrates that you are overcoming something to speak. It shows commitment and it's not boring. And, someone kind of falling apart in public is not boring. And so it may feel bad, it may feel anxious for you, but just know that even if you're nervous and even if you feel like you're flubbing your public comment completely, you're actually still being highly effective. So as long as you're there and you're speaking about something that you believe in, it's a win. It's already a win. So don't worry about it. You're nervous, great. You're not nervous, also great. And again, when it comes to public comments, I usually like to be clear and specific. So I'll start out by saying, we hope you adopt the ordinance, but we don't like this line item. We hope you change one line item in the ordinance and then adopt it. So that's the kind of clear and specific I'm thinking of here. If you don't want to be specific, it's also great to be vague too. Other people in your advocacy push might be really specific and you don't need to be that person every time. Sometimes you could just be like, yeah, what that person said, that was great. And I just want you to take climate action. That is still an effective public comment. And I think ultimately, what can really clinch it is having a personal anecdote. So if what you're talking about has affected you personally, if you have emotions about the subject, if it relates to your life and affects you, if you're willing to share that, that's some of the most powerful comments you can give. So this brings me to this loop that I find myself in, just kind of like a cycle that repeats itself. And yeah, this is kind of what advocacy feels like to me. I'll find out about the next meeting. I do a bunch of research. I read the agenda, all right, what's being discussed? What specific actions can we take within the boundaries of this agenda? Then once that's figured out, I'll talk with other advocates. We send out letters to elected officials. We request for meetings with them. Maybe we'll talk with staff to see what their idea is. Then after we've done all of our pre-meeting advocacy, we attend the meeting and deliver our comments. Then during the meeting, we take notes on the outcomes. So we're like, okay, we got 3 of 5 votes here. But one of these votes is actually, they seemed a little wishy-washy. They were concerned about the cost of this provision, but we have data on that. Maybe we can find that one elected official who's a little wishy-washy and give them some research to help strengthen their vote next time around. So taking notes on the outcome can be really powerful, especially when it comes to, if you plan on going back to the city over and over and over and over again. If you come to an elected official and you say, hey, I really liked on Wednesday at the city council meeting when you talked about the importance of having tree canopy in areas where people historically haven't had that. I really agree with that. I'm glad you mentioned it, and we'd love to support your efforts to do that. Remembering those specific things or taking notes on that and then coming back to the elected official, that's powerful because they're like, oh my gosh, this advocate is listening to what I'm saying. They're tracking the meetings. I can't mess around with them. I can't sneak stuff past them. They're going to be powerful. So it makes your allies confident that you are informed and are able to support them. And it makes your opponents afraid of you. So yeah, take notes on the outcome. And then I find out about the next meeting and the loop starts all over again. So that's kind of it. As advocates, we're just kind of waiting for the next opportunity, or sometimes pushing really hard to create that opportunity for ourselves, and the loop starts again. So there are some city-specific plastic policies that I want to delve into here. I guess we can share the PowerPoint after, so you can check out these hyperlinks here. There's examples of city use and styrofoam policies. But sort of zooming out in general, it's really good to do best practice research on policies that exist on your topic. So an example is if a city has already passed a plastics ordinance. So for me in my jurisdiction, the first entity to pass a single-use plastics ordinance was San Mateo County. So for all of the other cities that are considering plastics ordinances in the future, I'm able to tell those cities, hey, by the way, San Mateo County passed a plastics ordinance, and that was really strong. So rather than reinventing the wheel all by yourself, you should check out what your neighbors are doing and consider implementing that policy. So when you come to an elected official and you have knowledge of what other jurisdictions are doing and can give them examples of model policy language, that can help them feel a lot more secure in being aggressive in their own territory because, you know, they're supported and they're actually, you can tell them what you're doing is actually normal. It's expected behavior. It's what your neighbors are already doing. And as advocates, we can sort of generate our own consensus by like really focusing in on a champion city that passes a really great model policy. And then we take that model policy that we pushed for and we shop it around to all the other cities and say, hey, look at what this city did. You should be considering this too. And you can sort of generate your own momentum that builds on itself and you know, now you're looking at cities adopting these ordinances and you're not even having to influence them. They're just considering adopting the ordinance because 4 other cities around them have already done it. And now this thing is a life of its own. And yeah, you can really sort of have a catalytic impact as an advocate in that way. So yeah, some more resources to single-use plastics bans, some polystyrene bans. And so let's, again, zooming out again, let's say you don't have a specific passion for advocacy. You have some of the tools now to like start getting involved, reading agendas, but like, where do you begin? What topic? So for me, when I look at cities in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, there's 2 big buckets to consider for cities. There's transportation and there's buildings. Depending on the city, either transportation is slightly more than buildings or buildings is slightly more than transportation, but it's usually always buildings and transportation that are the big 2 emitters. So if you're interested in climate advocacy and you're not sure about where to start with your city, just consider, what is my city doing to decarbonize transportation? What is my city doing to decarbonize buildings? And those are 2 absolutely great places to start. Plastics as well are petroleum based. So a single-use plastics ordinance can be like a really nice sort of like stop the bleeding kind of ordinance in a city where like if the opportunity's there, absolutely. And then another great place to start is looking at what other cities are doing, or at least talking to advocates that are active in other cities and figuring out like what's going on there. So like for me, I'm primarily a buildings advocate. I have chosen to dedicate a lot of my time, energy, and resources to decarbonizing buildings. For me personally, I don't like pipelines. I've seen a lot of communities that have been destroyed by oil pipelines, especially indigenous communities that, like the oil companies hire cops and mercenaries to work together without badges to abuse people to build these pipelines. It's awful. And it just sent me on a path to where, like, for me as an advocate, like something that's core to my being is stopping pipelines from being built. No new gas or oil pipelines in the soil if we don't need to put them there. So I've been really active in going from city to city, just saying, hey, if you're building a new building, don't allow a gas pipeline to be put into that building. Build it all electric. And yeah, that's part of, you know, a lot of what cities are doing to decarbonize their building infrastructure is starting with new construction, making sure that we're not putting new gas pipelines into the soil. And I think I have slides on that in the future. So in the future, how does your city compare? There's going to be an upcoming discussion of different cities and rating them based on their actions that they've taken. So I'm not exactly sure how this discussion is going to work. I'm not going to be doing this, but this is kind of exciting for me. Even though this isn't my jurisdiction, I'm always curious to see what other cities are doing and how they compare to each other. So I think if you're curious about like getting started, but you don't know like what the policy landscape around you is looking like, this upcoming meeting just seems like a great opportunity to just sort of get your bearings set, get your foundation, figure out what's going on, who are the leaders, who are the laggards, where is their opportunity, who's got the good model policy we can be pushing around.